Todd Zolecki, MLB.com, Todd. This, to me, is really the first offseason that Clintac has some level of people paying attention to what he's doing, right? I mean, they hired a new manager. I think people are finally kind of paying attention to them a little bit rather than the first 2 years he was here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because the team did see some improvement in the second half of last season. I know they lost 96 games, but they were 37-38 after the All-Star break. Once they started playing all these young players, Hoskins and Alfaro and Williams, et cetera, et cetera. So, these moves, while a lot of them aren't going to, really excite people a lot, they are setting up next offseason when they're trying to position themselves to make a case for Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, and some of these other big stars to come to the Phillies. So, I mean, this is an important offseason. No doubt about it.
We'll get to that stuff in a minute. First, the Phillies are going to sign or re-sign Pat Neshek, 2-year deal. They traded him away last year. They're going to bring him back. Why does this make sense now after, last year? It seemed like last year they brought him on so they could trade him. Why the 2-year deal makes sense now?
Well, I think it's just the market as they see it. He had a really good year last year, so you weren't going to sign him for a 1-year deal. So it's basically what he could get. If you wanted to bring Pat Neshek back, despite his age, you're going to need him to sign him a 2-year deal. But they're bringing him back because I think they're looking at the starting pitching market, and they're seeing even the bottom of the rotation guys right now are looking for 5-6 year deals. And I'm not talking about Jake Arrieta or Yu Darvish. I'm talking about guys like Lance Lynn, Tyler Chatwood, who signed with the Cubs last week, signed a 3-year, $38 million deal. He's a guy that has never pitched more than 160 innings in a season before or really had much success at all. So they're looking at these starting pitchers going, do we really want to invest 5 years, $100 million, or 5 years, $80 million into kind of a bottom of the rotation guy? That might not make much sense. So let's actually just make the bullpen as strong as humanly possible. So if Vince Velasquez goes out next season and is at 100 pitches in the 4th inning, they're not handing the ball over to their long man. They're handing the ball over to Luis Garcia, Pat Neshek. They're in the market right now for Addison Reed, who's available. An actual legitimate relief pitcher that can give this offense and give this team a chance to win the game still.
Todd Zolecki, MLB.com, is with the Phillies in Orlando, where they've their name has come up around a lot of different things. So let's kind of start with what sounds real and not real here. How about the Machado stuff? What's your take? Where do they kind of sit on that?
Okay, here's what's happening with the Machado stuff. They love Manny Machado. They can see Manny Machado in a Phillies uniform at some point in the future. But as it stands right now, it just does not make any sense. Now, the Orioles are shopping Machado. They've talked to teams about Machado. But here's why it doesn't make sense for the Phillies right now. Everybody knows they're not a contending team, right? I mean, they're not going to win next season in terms of making the postseason. So they're not going to trade some of their top prospects. And I'm talking about like Scott Kingery, Sixto Sanchez, who every scout in baseball would just kill to have on their roster. They're not going to trade some of those types of prospects for Manny Machado to play one season with the Phillies, knowing he's going to become a free agent after next season. Now, the only way the Phillies would make a trade for Manny Machado is if somehow they communicated to the Phillies, which you couldn't really do until you have a trade in place, that Machado would sign a contract extension with the Phillies. That's the only way it would work, but there's so many reasons why that Machado is not expected to do that. I think he wants to test the market after next season. He could be a $300 million player next year, and he's not going to give up all that money just to come to the Phillies. So that's why it's not going to work. They're not going to give up the prospects, knowing that they could risk losing them, and then also because they know, why would we give up all these prospects? If we're going to sign with this extension anyway, we could just sign him. We could just sign him next offseason potentially, and give him all that money without giving up the players.
Todd, is there the problem because of the potential that the Orioles end up trading to somebody else, and then that team has a chance to kind of woo him, right? I mean, that's the one chance you're taking.
Yeah, that's a chance the Phillies are taking, but I think it's a chance that they are willing to take again because they don't look at this team right now as ready to win. So they love, and again, the prospects that the Phillies would have to give up to get Manny Machado, there's not like their number 28, number 29, number 30 prospects. You're talking about Scott Kingery and Sixto Sanchez, two guys that I think are going to be studs. Personally, I've been wrong before on prospects, but I really think that Kingery and Sixto Sanchez are going to be absolute studs. So I take that risk, quite frankly. I do not give up those guys, hoping you can possibly convince Manny Machado to stay. Because you know what? If you're wrong and he leaves, you have nothing to show for it, and you've blown some of your best prospects for a fantastic third baseman, but on a team that didn't have a chance to win in 2018 in the first place.
Todd Zolecki's with us. What about any of the other names? We heard Arrieta's name. I can't imagine they're going to be in that road. I have heard a little Eric Hosmer. Any of the bigger names, Carlos Santana, I don't know that he makes a lot of sense, although I keep hearing his name. Do you think any of the bigger name guys make sense?
I don't see those bigger guys making sense, especially Jake Arrieta and Yu Darvish. These guys are pitchers in their early 30s with a ton of mileage on their arms. They're looking for $180 to $200 million deals. And again, the Phillies are not ready to win next season. So, and don't forget what happened with Roy Halladay's contract, Cliff Lee's contract. Roy Halladay's last 2 years, he hit the wall with injuries. Cliff Lee's last 2 years, he hit the wall with injuries. Roy Oswalt's last year or two, he hit the wall with injuries. You see starting pitchers who sign these mega contracts in their early 30s, they fade hard those final few years of the deal, and presumably what the Phillies are hoping is those will be the years when they actually need an ace type of pitcher. So I think what the Phillies, they're going to pass on these guys. Team agents are floating the Phillies' name basically as leverage, right? Like I have no doubt that the Phillies have met with Scott Boras this week, just to talk with them and get the lay of the land. But I have no doubt that they're going to pass on these guys this offseason and fortify that bullpen, and then next offseason, if they need an ace or they need an outfielder or they need a third baseman, they're going to be in a better position to go out and do it because they're also going to have a better feel for which of these players in the current roster can play or not.
Todd's like,
let me just add this too. People freak out about like, oh my gosh, what if you can't get a starter when you need one? Starters are always available. They're always available. The Phillies got Roy Halladay once. They got Cliff Lee twice. They got Roy Oswalt once. You can get a starter when you truly need it. So to commit $200 million, not knowing, when you're going to need it right now, to me doesn't make much sense at all, knowing that you can get a starter like that at some point down the road.
Is this the year that all these guys, the young starters that they've had the last 3 or 4 years, that have all kind of been up and down and had chances and no one's really stood out, is this the year they make their decisions on who stays, who goes?
I think so in a lot of ways, yeah. They need to figure out – some of these guys need to step up. I think the only guy safe and really going into the season for a rotation spot is Aaron Nola. It's a huge year for Vince Velasquez. To me, he's been a disappointment. He's injury-prone. He can't get past the 5th inning. I do like Jared Eichhoff as a solid bottom-of-the-rotation guy, but he took a step back last year. His velocity was down. And then you have Nick Pivetta. He's got great stuff, but he really got hit around last year. The Phillies are really high on him, though. They think that, this is more of an experience thing with him. If he can get a little bit more experience, get a little bit more opportunity, he'll straighten things out. And then, of course, you have like the Jake Thompsons and the Zach Eflins who battle some injuries and ineffectiveness. But certainly this next season is a big one for this Phillies rotation. They do need some of these guys to step up. No doubt about it. They absolutely need some of these guys to step up.
How about the guys on their current roster? Galvis, Hernandez, namingly those two guys at the top of the list. Any movement going to be happening with those two guys?
Well, the Angels are still interested in Cesar Hernandez. The Padres reportedly have some interest in Freddie Galvis. I personally think the Phillies need to trade one of those guys to clear up some room, especially with Scott Kingery possibly being promoted the first month of the season or two. But the Phillies are also maintaining that, hey, if we don't get the right don't get the right return for these two guys, we're happy to hold on to them and rotate them. We just talked to Gabe Kapler about it. He thinks he can keep all these guys happy, and make this glut of infielders work by keeping everybody fresher, by using with their best matchups, etc. I don't know how realistic that is. You tell Freddie Galvis, who played 162 games last season, that hey, you might only play 120 or so, or maybe even less than that. It's going to be tough to see how he stays happy. So they're going to have to try to figure that out. I think some of it is posturing at this point, but again, they don't need to give these players away. I think it would be worse to give Cesar Hernandez away, or worse to give Freddie Galvis away, just to make room for J.P. Crawford or possibly Scott Kingery. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Do they want Crawford and Kingery to start the year up here, or do you think Crawford, more Crawford because he has been up here, but Kingery has not? Do you think either one of those guys starts on the big league roster?
I think Crawford will be on the big league roster. I do. I guess I can't say he's a lock, but he's pretty close to a lock in my mind. Now, Scott Kingery, he is not going to start the season on the big league roster, and it's basically a big league service situation. It's very similar to what the Cubs did with Chris Bryant a few years ago. If you remember, Chris Bryant had an outstanding spring. It might have been 2014, 2015. He was incredible in spring training. He was one of the top prospects in all of Major League Baseball, and the Cubs sent him to AAA to start the season, and everybody freaked out. And it was obvious they were doing it for service time purposes, so they could keep him basically an extra season. And now you don't hear Cubs fans complaining about it. They were going nuts at the time and what a disgrace it was, et cetera, et cetera. But now the Cubs fans know they have Chris Bryant for an extra year. They absolutely love it. And I think the same thing is going to happen with Scott Kingery. He could have a great spring training. He could be hitting 450 the first 2-3 weeks of the season, but he's not going to get called up until that magical date when, basically it won't cost the Phillies another year of team control. Once they get past that date, I think it's game on for Scott Kingery as long as he's playing well.
At least spring training, Todd, seemingly there's going to be a lot of younger guys that will get an opportunity. The last couple of years, you've heard a lot of these young guys, but they haven't had a shot. They're going to go into April with a very young starting 8, right?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And it's going to be pretty much the starting 8 that they finished last season with. You're going to have Jorge Alfaro at catcher. You're going to have Cameron Rupp or Andrew Knapp as the backup. Rhys Hoskins will be at first base. Michael Franco is going to get one final shot to kind of prove himself. And the outfield is going to be Aaron Altero, Dubal Herrera, Nick Williams. And then again, obviously, you're going to have some sort of combination of Crawford, Galvis, Hernandez, in the middle infield. But that team, I think, averaged a half a run more per game the final 2 months of the season than they started the season. So they definitely showed some potential. They showed some pop. They showed some promise, and they're going to try to open the season with them. And we just talked to Gabe Kapler, like I mentioned. He said, hey, he just wants these guys to make small incremental improvements, and if they can do that, he thinks this team can be even a little bit better next season, and the record should improve. Again, obviously, it remains to be seen if all these guys take a step forward. It's probably not going to happen that way, but certainly this team should be better than a 96-loss team, which they were last year.
We hope so. It's been a while since the baseball season has been had any sort of meeting here in Philadelphia. Todd Zolecki, right. MLB.com in Orlando for the winter meetings in the Phillies. By the way, Addison Reed, is that another name? It really looks like teams are going to fix the bullpens here after watching these playoffs.
And that's exactly right. Baseball is a kind of a copycat industry. So, a few years ago, when the Royals won the World Series, they had 3 at the back end of the rotation. Everybody's like, well, okay, now we have to find 3 stud relievers to lock up the end of the game. And now you see teams that go, as soon as the starter gets into trouble 4th, 5th inning, we're going to go to our superstar stud bullpen. And I think that's what the Phillies are trying to recreate. By re-signing Neshek, if they can get Addison Reed, they could possibly bring in a 3rd veteran reliever to join up with Neris and Luis Garcia, Ramos, Victor Arano, Adam Morgan's numbers the last half of the season. I know people didn't really pay that close attention to Adam Morgan, but his numbers were pretty darn good as a left-handed reliever. So they think that they can throw all those guys in there. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if Velasquez, if Pivetta gets knocked out in the fourth inning, they're not throwing in their long man, their mop-up guy. They're throwing in Garcia, Reed, Neshek to kind of give this team a chance to win.
All right, Todd Zolecki in Orlando. Of course, the Phillies very new with the manager and the new regime out there. We'll see what happens this offseason. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks.